I really did miss hospitality, and I miss cooking real food and giving it to people straight away and seeing their reaction. And, you know, the restaurants are actually this amazingly beautiful thing where it's its own little microcosm. And, you know, I did miss that.
The food world is full of surprises, but some still take your breath away. When I heard recently that Shaun Quade had moved back from the US to Canberra, I was gobsmacked. Shaun Quade is known to many people in food as a fine dining chef. He took Melbourne by storm at Lume, and then he took a huge about turn and started making vegan cheese in the US. He is now back in Canberra, where he is a key part of the Lawns of the Lobby development. Shaun, we need to know everything. Welcome to Dirty Linen.
Thanks, Dani. Thanks for having me on. It's nice to be back.
Well, it's great to have you back in the country, but it is certainly unexpected. We chatted to your partner, Veronica Phil, on the podcast a few years ago when you were in the throes of taking the US by storm. So, yeah, we'll have to refer people back to that one to join her in that moment in time. But we're all about what's happening now. So perhaps let's start there. What are you doing in Canberra?
What am I doing in Canberra? So it seems to be the question everyone's asking. So, we wound our business up very successfully in the US, where we've been for the last 4 years, and I really missed hospitality. The 4 years in food tech was really exciting. It was really challenging because it's completely different, completely left field to what I grew up doing. So I was looking at coming back home, and I was talking with Veronica, and the economist in her was, looking at which city in Australia had the best, economic landscape for hospitality, and we kind of started looking at Canberra, and just through connections and having a few phone calls here and there, we've ended up in Canberra, and I've signed on as culinary director for the Lawns of the Lobby precinct, which is in the National Parliamentary Triangle in Parks. So, yeah, a little bit of a culture shock, but a good culture shock. It's really nice to be home. It was actually quite emotional coming home after, because we hadn't been home for 4 years. We stayed in the US the entire time. So, yeah.
Well, it was a pretty tricky 4 years to be jetting back and forth. So we all know why. And that's so interesting. I mean, Veronica is such a data nerd, and it actually makes complete sense that it was her that drove this. In my mind, you'd been headhunted, and they, some Canberra restaurateurs, cast the net far and wide and found you. But of course, that makes complete sense. So what's the offering going to be there? What sort of venues are you going to be overseeing at Lawns of the Lobby?
So I guess it's a little bit different to what I was previously doing at Lume. I mean, that was very much a, let's say, a vanity project. It's probably a nice way to put it. And, obviously not having been in hospitality for close to 5 years now, or 4.5 years, I just wanted to kind of get in and do something completely different. So the Lawns of the Lobby is basically a food precinct that is in the old Lobby restaurant building, just on the edge of the National Rose Garden. So this restaurant opened in, I think it was 1969, was quite iconic. It's been the scene of like a lot of different, political lunches, long lunches. I'm sure there's some behind the scenes conversations and parliamentary gossip that's been had there. And we've basically, the people that I'm working for have bought the building off the government with the direction of completely revamping the site and making the Parliamentary Triangle an exciting entertainment destination. So There's already an existing restaurant there called Koto, which has opened in August, which is doing amazingly well. It's a really high-end Japanese restaurant, amazing food, amazing fit-out. And we're basically on the other side of that, facing out into the Rose Garden. We've got a beautiful octagonal building which opens up completely, facing out onto the garden. And there's two offerings from there. One is called Ballyhoo, which is basically our take on like a restaurant/wine bar. So we've got a great charcoal grill. We've got a Marana Forni pizza oven in there, wood-fired oven. So lots of like toasted flatbreads and lots of cooking over coal. And then I guess leaning into a bit of what I've been doing over the last few years, which is a lot of like fermentation as well. That'll be a big part of the menu. And then just really honing in on, our produce that we have here is absolutely amazing. And I think after being overseas for 4 years and eating at some of the, best restaurants in the US, we really do hit above our weight here. I really miss the food here. I miss the produce. It's so much better than anything else I've had in the US. So that's Ballyhoo. And then we're doing a more casual offering called Roses, which is very much focused around the wood-fired oven. So pizza by the slice, toasted wood-fired sandwiches during the day, and then into the night, wood-fired pies and a few other bits and pieces, but really centered around that wood oven. So it really is kind of a precinct for everyone. We're really trying to attract people to the area and keep them there, not just as a tourist, but as an entertainment precinct where they can just come and have amazing food and wine, hang out in the garden. So yeah, there's a lot of different options there. Really exciting.
It sounds exciting. It sounds delicious, and it sounds like it's well worth visiting, if only to listen to the walls talk, but definitely to eat your food. I don't even know where to go with this conversation, Shaun, because there are so many things that I want to pick up on. But let's start with Lume, because you're the one that called it a vanity project. It was a tasting menu restaurant. It was pretty high concept. The food was sometimes challenging. There was a lot of theatre to the experience in a very bijou sort of way. It was sort of food as art, but there was quite a lot demanded of the diner. How do you reflect on it now?
I am extremely proud of what we did at Lume. I am the first to admit that, I guess to the average punter, they would probably look at that sort of restaurant and think it's completely wanky and, who's this guy tatting around with his tweezers. But, I guess when you're a professional and you take your career very seriously and you work in, all these amazing restaurants and you build yourself up and you train and you focus and you get to open your own restaurant, you basically put your whole career behind it. And this is what I can do. And I think it did take a couple of years to kind of really hone in on what that restaurant did best, which was very theatrical. And that's personally what I found really exciting as well, was actually working with all these amazing people that we had come through the doors, both front and back of house. And, looking at where those people are now, where they've moved on to, we've got people spread all over the world in, some of the world's best restaurants in different positions. I actually find that hugely satisfying, more so than, I guess, any of the actual offering that we had at the restaurant. Is actually the people that came through and made it what it was. So, that's probably a big focus that I want to have with the new venue, is like, how do we do that again? How do we, encourage people to take hospitality serious as a profession and not just a stopgap at uni or to get their PR or something like that. So I guess Canberra is notoriously hard for finding good staff. There's definitely a lot of people here, but we really do want to, that's what I'm passionate about now, is like, how do we train and mentor young people so that they're in the industry and they stay in the industry and it's exciting and they don't burn out after 2 or 3 years. Because that's the other thing with Lume. I completely burnt out from that place. It was so demanding of me personally. doing 90, 100 hours a week to make that place tick. Hugely satisfying, but just, obviously that's not sustainable. So,
well, and also when you're doing that, it is really hard to do what you say you want to do now, which is to mentor people and to give them the kind of experience that's going to make them really see a viable future for themselves. But back on the Lume experience, what do you reckon was peak Lume? What's a dish or a night that happened there that really, for people who didn't experience it, really explains it for them?
Well, I think it was probably a night that very well that you're a part of. When we did the art versus science dinner, that was a huge amount of fun for us and for everyone that was there. So I guess most people would expect me to say Pearl on the Ocean Floor, but that dish, I think once I was on MasterChef with that dish, it got the kitchen was completely overwhelmed with it, and we to be honest actually got sick of making it. But I think the art versus science dinner was cool because it basically showed off everything that was great about that restaurant. It was very whimsical, it was fun, it was theatrical. The food is on point, there's a lot of depth of flavor there, there's a lot of technique there, and it's very experiential, multi-sensory, triggering all people's all their senses when they come in through that front door, and even beforehand, with the lead up to the dinner and working with all multidisciplinary people. It was a lot of fun. So.
I've just got flashes of that popping up for me. So people were dressed as scientists, and there were, I guess, performers planted at the table as though they were guests, and kind of, designing the experience for the people around them. There was the bit of blood and gore, and was there a poison element or something? It was, it was very immersive. It was. I
think we staged a nuclear meltdown.
Yeah, I think you did.
And piled everyone into our back cool room, and then brought them back out again. And there was
ticking clocks
dancing in our wine. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was fun. It was very cheeky. And all completely made up. It was basically to highlight what the future of food looked like through our lens, and it was with the Prague Culinary Institute, which does not exist, but was a figment of our imagination. Veronica's old man played Professor Edelman, who was the CEO that had possible right wing backgrounds, just all sorts of crazy stuff, but. Yeah, again, just fun. We just had fun with it, and I think that reflected in what we did at the restaurant.
And so, speaking about the future of food, what you did then decide the future of food was plant-based cheese. So you had an amazing vegan menu at Lume. It was always part of what you did, and one of the hero dishes was this blue cheese made of cauliflower. And so that was sort of the jumping off point for this whole new direction, which took you guys to the US and to Silicon Valley and food tech. Tell us about that. What was it like to throw in this fine dining identity and become a manufacturer?
Yeah, I mean, I just thinking about that question, there's just so many emotions, because the last 4 years have been it's literally the hardest thing I've ever done, just hugely challenging. And because we did it in a foreign country, doubly so. But, I was at Lume, and I was basically thinking to myself, what are we doing with this? What's next? You're like approaching 40, and you can't feel your legs when you get up in the morning. So like, what am I doing this for? Am I really being challenged every day? Or as most tasting menu restaurants become, it's basically just like a military operation where you're just going through the motions every day. Everything's planned out. It kind of sucks all the creativity out of it. So I always, I guess, kind of think left field a little bit, and we had been playing around with all these vegan dishes at the restaurant, and Veronica came in one night and actually tried some of the cheeses that I'd been playing around with that were, dotted around our wine cellar. And I could just see like the cogs turning in front of me. And she's like, we should commercialize these. These are amazing. There's a huge market opportunity for this. And that's exactly what we did. So we thought it was a good time to get out of hospitality for a while, because creatively that's what I was feeling. And, I think even before COVID, the way that we were running the restaurant was very unsustainable. So it just seemed like a good time to get into something completely different. And, we commercialized the products pretty quickly. We got a lot of interest very quickly from venture capital. Veronica did an amazing job of actually raising money for the business. And we found ourselves in New York probably, I don't know, it's probably a couple of months after we actually left the restaurant. It was pretty quick. So we went over there, did an accelerator, and then just grew the business from there, got more funding for our seed round, moved to California, moved to LA, set up a manufacturing facility, further commercialized products. And we ended up, I think, at the height of Lume, before we moved on from, not Lume, Grounded was selling into just under 2,000 stores across the US, which sounds like a lot, but it was actually, the US is a huge country with, 8 times the population of Australia, I think. So, again, hugely challenging, especially for me not having a background in food science. Obviously being a pastry chef for so many years, there's a certain element of that, but I did have to learn a lot of things from scratch and go from making food and then serving it, an hour later to get to like 50 guests, to making food that is going to last 6 months, and, talking in like, tons and yeah, just, I don't know. I could talk for about 3 hours on our experience.
Well, we probably don't have 3 hours, but I'd love to ask you to talk about it a little bit more. I mean, Veronica suggested that you may have some horrific insights into the world of food manufacturing.
Yeah, it's. I don't know. I don't want to sound too negative about the future of the world or anything like that, but I guess being in Silicon Valley and kind of mixing with that crowd and raising money and mixing with all these other startups that are doing pretty amazing stuff scientifically, and just kind of seeing how the sausage is made on the other side of the spectrum, and the people that are throwing literally billions of dollars into this alternative protein industry, just how misguided some of it is. Silicon Valley really is a bubble, and I think there's a lot of decisions being made about how we're going to eat in the future that just make no sense whatsoever. And there's a lot of companies that are getting funding, that are working on things that are, on the benchtop, they're quite cool and again, I guess useful for a very small amount of the population. But how do we? The bigger question is like, how are we going to feed, the billions of people that are going to, materialize on Earth over the next decade, and not necessarily in Western countries. Where I feel like we're kind of focusing on the wrong areas when it comes to what the future of food looks like. So it was, from our personal experience with Grounded, when you start coming up against the Krafts and the Nestles of the world, where they've got, they're a multinational corporation with billions of dollars, and we had, I think we raised $4 million, which seems like a lot of money, but it's like giving someone $20 to, go and cook a Lume tasting menu. Basically, that's kind of the equivalent. So, again, super proud of what we did with Grounded. We felt like we kind of, conquered our part of the world with that, and we had an amazing technology which we developed, and again, like creatively, personally, hugely satisfying to be able to do that. Seeing Veronica as a CEO battling it out with, all the Silicon Valley tech bros that would not give her time of day, but she was up there, and she's still doing, she's working as a fractional marketing officer for a lot of their companies now. So, it was a huge change from running a tiny fine dining restaurant in Melbourne, in a nutshell.
Yeah. I mean, that's such interesting insights, and, there wouldn't be many people that we would speak to that have, been embedded in that world. I mean, it sounds like you had these really cool, exciting products that you made on a very small scale, but it sounds like those 4 years, I mean, you've scaled it up, but it sounds like it was a slow, demoralizing dawning of realization about, the world that you'd got into.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the bigger that you become, it becomes less about food as something that's meant for nourishment, and it just becomes a strict commodity, which is not how we should be thinking about food. Obviously, there's logistics at play, but when you're talking about craft products or Nestle products, I single those two out because they were kind of our direct competitors. But there's absolutely nothing nutritious about those products, particularly the plant-based products that they're basically shoving modified starches and additives into them. You start talking about selling fresh products into retailers. In Australia, it's challenging because we're a huge country and we've only got, we've got Woolies and Coles and RGA to a lesser extent. There you've got literally, hundreds of different retailers that you all have to deal with. They all want stocking fees. They all want this. They all want that. They want marketing dollars behind it, and they also want a huge shelf life from your product, which is, the first thing they ask you is not, is this good for my customers? It's like, can I freeze this? Or how long will this last? Or can you do this cheaper?
Yeah. They're not very tasty questions.
No, exactly. So, I mean, it was a big culture shock for me because I'm trying to make the products as, from being a chef's mindset of how do I make these better, tastier, more delicious, more nutritious? And you're coming up against food scientists who are doing the exact opposite. They're like, how do I make this cheaper? How do I strip out, these ingredients so it's got a shorter ingredient list that, customers are basically being greenwashed into thinking is good. In some aspects it is good, but, some of our products that we were kind of up against are basically just like a starch block with, a bunch of E numbers behind it and some food coloring, and that's what's being sold as a nutritious alternative. So, it's just bullshit. So that's what we're up against. And, I hope I don't sound too bitter about it, but it's more disconcerting more than anything, I would say, just seeing how, these huge companies are, huge companies that do actually have the means behind them to change how customers think about food. Because the way that we eat in the Western world is it's relatively new. The whole breakfast, lunch and dinner thing, the cereals and pastries and all that sort of thing is very, very new in human evolution. So, without getting too deep on that subject, it's, these companies that do have the opportunity to change things, they just don't. They're just trying to get more money out of people. And, the pandemic highlighted that, I think, a lot more. Yeah.
I mean, I think you do sound a bit bummed out, but I think it's like you're appropriately skeptical. And I think it's, as much as when we talk about, when we talk about the restaurant world, we're generally talking about real ingredients cooked for, real consumers. And I think so much of the food world is very far from that. And I mean, you might as well realize it. I mean, my dealings with those huge multinationals are that there are so many layers that even the idea that there is a hidden kernel of truth feels unlikely. It's Yeah. So, I get it. I get what you're saying, although I haven't had the experiences, of course, that you guys have. So, so given your experiences, Shaun, and this opportunity to come to Canberra and cook pretty real food for pretty real people, what is it like to start re-entering the world of restaurants?
To me, it's really exciting, super exciting. It did take a while to kind of get my head around, and because I was based in Melbourne for so many years as well, just it's just immersing yourself into that world again, because it is such a unique thing that we do every day. So I really did miss it, after all the stuff that I've just said. I mean, you said yourself, I kind of just sound a bit bummed about it, and I really did miss hospitality, and I miss cooking real food and giving it to people straight away, and seeing their reaction. And, the restaurants are actually this amazingly beautiful thing where it's its own little microcosm. And, I did miss that. So, like I said before, we have some of the best produce in the world. And, the food scene here is completely underrated on a world stage. It's kind of strange living in the US how little Australia is kind of mentioned in world news, unless it's something about kangaroos or some stupid stereotypical thing. So getting into restaurants is that's kind of, I guess, in my blood. I know what I'm doing as well. I don't kind of feel like an apprentice again, which I have felt like over the last few years. And just working with great people again. I mean, that's kind of the focus now is finding a new team and people that are equally as passionate about this good food and good service and ultimately hospitality. You're asking before about what we did at Lume. I think ultimately what we became was, it was all about the guest and the guest experience, whether it was front or back of house or food or wine or how we talk to them. I mean, that's hospitality at the end of the day. That's what we're all doing. So that's what we're focusing on. And I'm trying to find people that, think the same way, basically.
It's interesting that you talked about the tasting menu format as quashing creativity, because I think a lot of people in hospitality would think that, that is the beating heart of creativity when you're deciding what the guest eats and you just roll it out. But where do you think creativity lies as a chef?
I think it's a personal thing, to be honest. It depends on what gets you out of bed in the morning. When I was talking about Lume before, I found myself just getting bored with it. And, I'm sure most of that came from a mental aspect, just being completely burnt out. And, I've made no secret of the fact that I've had mental health issues in the past. And, that's always a big part of it as well. And a lot of people in the industry struggle with that. And we still don't really talk about it openly that much. It's just kind of seen as a, oh yeah, we've got to talk about that now, but no one still really does, or no one really addresses it. So, creativity to me is there needs to be guidelines. If you are given the brief that you can just do whatever you want, that's boring. Because anyone can just write this kind of whimsical menu and kind of, buy in all these fantastic things and throw this kind of menu together. But when you've got guidelines and you're being given a brief, I actually find that more creative, where it's like I've got to fit within this box, and I've got to hit these margins, and I've got these people to do that with. How do I deliver a unique experience? How do I deliver a great hospitality to people, to guests that come in? So I find that really creative. The whole business aspect of it now, not just writing a menu. That's kind of the easy bit. The challenging bit is actually forming the business and training the people and mentoring them and getting them to think how you do. And ultimately you can't do everything yourself. So something else I was quite, I guess, personally proud of with Lume was that, I didn't necessarily need to be there anymore. we trained everyone so well that the place just ran like clockwork. And I guess that was ultimately boring for me as well. So I kind of phased myself out of the business a lot. But, from a challenging aspect, it was hugely satisfying being able to do that and having those people come through Lume and then go on, and you see the effect that those people have on the industry now. They've gone on to do their own thing, and they're doing these hugely creative things and all sorts of different offerings as well, not just other restaurants. So that to me is like really hugely satisfying. So I want to do that again. To me, that's creativity.
Shaun, what kind of conversations should we be having about mental health in hospitality?
I think just really just talking about it on a regular basis, checking in with your staff on a regular basis. I know it's difficult as an employer, having to work around, if someone says to you, I need a mental health day, or I'm struggling with this. Because we're under so much pressure, particularly in hospitality, it's a huge challenge. And it's kind of like the last thing that you want to hear from your staff is, hey, I've got a problem. You want your staff to solve problems, not cause them. But ultimately, it's a people industry. We're working with real people. We're not working with robots. Maybe in the future, unfortunately, but at the moment we're working with people, so we need to accommodate to them. We can't just kind of bitch and moan about it or just say get over it anymore. And I still think that kind of happens a lot. So, the challenge is now, how do we get people into the industry first, and then how do we look after them, and how do we make hospitality a viable profession for kids that are leaving school? What is going to attract them to this, to this industry that is still seen as kind of like this Gordon Ramsay-esque, shouting and yelling and hot and sweaty. I mean, it's not overly appealing to people. So if it's seen as like supportive and creative, that's much more appealing. So we need to highlight that.
And you wouldn't be the only, owner, employer, leader who has their own mental health challenges from time to time. I mean, what is it, what can employers do when they, hit these situations?
I think ultimately it comes down to yourself, just knowing how you tick. I mean, when I was younger, I had a lot of therapy, and I kind of figured out, these are triggers for me. This is what's happening in my head sometimes. This is, these are things that I should steer away from. If you know that about yourself, it's like learning about food and about recipes. You can't just like take a recipe and then give it to someone and tell them to make it. They've got to understand how it works first. Otherwise, it's just going to be a shitty reproduction. So just having an understanding about yourself, and then then you can start to look after other people. In my mind, I feel like just having that understanding that, no one's perfect. There is going to be challenging days. There is going to be days where you don't feel like doing this, or that, you're like, why the fuck am I in hospitality? This is so stressful. My cogs are not lining up this week or whatever. Customers are being difficult, et cetera, et cetera. That's just the reality of the industry. And I think if you let, that mental health aspect get the better of you, which, from time to time it does, but if you know yourself and you know how to deal with it, and you have hopefully a support structure in place of people that do understand what you go through from time to time, and that's where talking about it comes in. I think just having that support structure as well, and my partner Veronica is amazingly supportive. She knows exactly how I tick, and sometimes I just need to be left alone, and sometimes I don't. So if you've got someone in your life that can do that for you, and it doesn't need to be a partner, it can be the staff at work as well. And that's my whole point in a nutshell, is just talking about it more. It's not a taboo subject. 2 out of 3 people have a mental illness. So we just need to get the fuck over it and start talking about it more. And it's not a weird thing. Simple as that.
Yeah, really powerful. And so, Shaun, you're going to be interviewing people for positions that you've got going. Like if you have, a young school leaver, you perhaps sense a bit of a spark in them, they might be someone that you could see spending a really wonderful career in hospitality. How would you sell the industry to them?
That's a good question. Because I'm literally doing that at the moment. I've actually been having a conversation with a woman that's exactly the same age as me, and she's looking at leaving her current profession that she's done since she left school and becoming a chef. So I've been very delicately saying, like, these are the hours. It's a little bit antisocial unless you actually love what you do. At the end of the day, you actually have to care about people, and you have to like food. I mean, I wasn't really brought up around good food. Like my parents obviously know how to cook, but we weren't like a foodie household. I guess I kind of discovered that by myself. But I would say it's a hugely creative industry, and there's so many different aspects to it. I mean, just look at the career I've had and all the different places I've worked in and all the different avenues I've gone down, from pastry chef to baking to, fine dining to more casual, and then into the food manufacturing scene and food science, and then back to, being more, business orientated as well. There's so many different aspects to it, and it's all very creative. So hugely exciting. I mean, even what we're doing at the moment, we've got so many different aspects to the kitchen that we're running because we've got different venues. Hugely exciting for a young chef to come in and be able to learn how to do all this stuff from scratch, from, doughs and fermentation and sauces and cooking over fire and actually going out and talking to customers, which we force the chefs to do. So, I would love to come along to a project like this as a first year and be like, wow, okay, I've got all my, eggs in a basket here.
Oh, I love it. It's exciting, and I'm excited to come and see what you get up to there, Shaun. What a great chat. I'm so happy you are back in Australia and we get to eat your food, although it's so different from the food of yours I've experienced in the past. Will there be any plant-based cheese?
Maybe not to start off with. I'm still
still scarred.
Still scarred a little bit. I may have lost the recipes. No. At some point, I mean, that's the world we live in now. There's more and more people going plant-based. So, as far as grounded hemp-based cheeses, probably not.
Okay. Well, yeah, all the best with staffing it up and getting it up and going. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. A really, worthwhile and valuable conversation that I think will mean a lot to a lot of people. Thanks, Shaun.
Thanks, Dani. It's great to chat with you again.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinenat.deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This